People often say that silence is golden. But sometimes, silence is the roar of a gathering storm, building just enough strength to flatten everything in its path. It is the quiet resolve of a soul pushed past its limits, a dangerous calm that precedes a meticulously planned reckoning. For Alara, silence had been her shield and her compromise for years, a currency she paid for a semblance of peace in a family that never considered her one of their own. But on that cold Tuesday afternoon, her silence began to transform into a weapon. The private hospital room was aggressively white, so sterile and bright that it seemed to bleach the very emotion from the air. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beep of a heart monitor, a lonely metronome counting down seconds that felt like hours. In the center of this cold stage stood Alara, her posture poised, her expression unreadable. In her hand, a fountain pen glided across the signature line of a check. The ink was a deep, definitive black against the pale blue paper, finalizing a number with enough zeros to purchase a new life, or in this case, to prolong an old one. This was for George Harrison, her father-in-law. This was for his heart. Across the room, the rest of the Harrison family stood clustered together, a tight knot of anxious energy. Her husband, Liam, shifted his weight from foot to foot, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet her eyes. His mother, Matilda, watched the pen in Alara's hand with the intensity of a hawk, her face a mask of strained concern that did little to hide the sharp, appraising glint in her eyes. And beside her, Chloe, Liam's sister, had a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on her lips. They were a portrait of a worried family, but beneath the surface, Alara could feel the thrum of a different emotion, a hungry, impatient greed. With a final, elegant flourish, she finished her signature. The sound seemed to echo in the silent room. She tore the check from the book, the crisp rip of the paper slicing through the tension. She walked towards them, her steps measured and deliberate. She held it out to Liam. He took it, his fingers brushing against hers for a fleeting moment, his touch clammy and brief. And then, the shift happened. It was instantaneous, a subtle drop in the room's temperature that only she could feel. Matilda smoothly plucked the check from her son's hand, her eyes scanning the amount, her lips thinning in a silent nod of grim satisfaction. There was no thank you, no look of relief. Chloe leaned in and whispered something in Liam's ear, and he gave a short, guilty nod in response. In that single, damning moment, the charade evaporated. Alara saw it all with a blinding clarity. This wasn't a family grateful for a lifeline. This was a pack of wolves, satisfied with their kill. Her sacrifice wasn't a gift, it was an expectation, a transaction that had just been completed. A wave of cold, so profound it felt like ice water filling her veins, washed over her. And in that sterile, white room, something within Alara broke. But it did not shatter. Instead, it fused together, hardening into something cold, sharp, and resolute. Her silence was no longer a shield. It was now the quiet, patient architect of their downfall. To understand the ice that formed in Alara's veins in that hospital room, you must first understand the fire in which she was forged. Alara was not born into a world of manicured lawns and inherited legacies. She was a child of concrete and ambition, raised in a small apartment where the scent of her mother's cooking mingled with the ozone smell of old electronics from her father's repair bench. She was a builder, not by trade, but by instinct. While other children played with dolls, Alara built worlds out of spare circuit boards and lines of code. She saw patterns in chaos, solutions in complexity. This vision led her to create OptiStream, a logistics software company she started in her garage with nothing but a second-hand computer and a formidable intellect. Within a decade, OptiStream was a multi-million-dollar powerhouse, revolutionizing supply chains across the country. Alara had built an empire from nothing, and she was its undisputed queen. Her only vulnerability, her single, tragic blind spot, was Liam Harrison. They met at a tech gala she had been reluctantly dragged to. He was everything she wasn't, smooth, charming, and effortlessly at ease in a world of privilege. He was the heir to the Harrison name, a name once synonymous with the finest textiles in America. He was captivated by her, not just by her beauty, but by the fierce intelligence that burned behind her eyes. He told her she was a supernova in a room full of dying stars. For Ilara, who had spent her life focused on algorithms and market projections, Liam's attention was a different kind of validation. He saw her, not just her success. He made her feel that her life's work was not just profitable, but glamorous. Their romance was a whirlwind, a fairy tale she, the girl from the wrong side of the tracks, had never dared to dream of. She fell in love not with his money or his name, but with the illusion of a partnership, of a safe harbor where her brilliant, restless mind could find peace. She was so enamored with the dream he sold her that she failed to read the fine print. The first time Liam took her to the Harrison estate, a sprawling colonial mansion an hour outside the city, she felt a pang of intimidation. The house, like the family, was grand and imposing, but up close, she could see the cracks in the facade. Faded paint peeled from the window frames, and a faint scent of dust and decay clung to the opulent furnishings. It was a monument to a past glory the family was desperate to maintain, and its primary curator was Matilda Harrison. From the moment they met, Matilda treated Ilara not as a potential daughter, but as a curious and slightly distasteful acquisition. Her compliments were traps, each one lined with spikes. "What a remarkable story you have, dear," she had said during their first dinner, her voice as smooth as silk. "To pull yourself up like that, it's almost theatrical." Every word was designed to remind Ilara of her place, to emphasize that she was a guest in their world, not a resident. Chloe, Liam's younger sister, was more direct. She eyed Ilara's success with a potent cocktail of envy and disdain. "I just don't understand your obsession with work," Chloe once mused, swirling a glass of wine. "If I had your kind of money, I'd spend my days on a yacht, not in an office." To Chloe, Ilara's ambition was vulgar, a desperate striving that was unnecessary for people of their class. Liam, her beloved Liam, always played the hapless mediator. "They just need time to get to know you," he would insist, flashing the charming smile that always disarmed her. "They've never met anyone like you." It was meant as a compliment, but over time, it began to feel like an explanation for why she would never truly belong. The only one who showed a flicker of genuine interest was George, the patriarch. A quiet, withdrawn man, he had once asked Ilara to explain the core function of her software. For a few minutes, he had seemed genuinely fascinated, his eyes lighting up with an intellectual curiosity she hadn't seen in anyone else in the family. But a single icy glance from Matilda was enough to make him retreat into his usual silence. Blinded by love and an earnest desire to build a true family, Ilara began to invest. She didn't just invest her heart, she invested her capital. She believed that if she could solve their problems, she could earn their affection. When the mansion's roof needed replacing, she wrote the check. When Chloe wanted to open a boutique art gallery that was doomed from the start, Ilara funded the vanity project without a second thought. She poured money into reviving the Harrison textile brand, an effort that felt more like sentimental archaeology than a viable business. Each time, Liam would come to her with a look of pained apology. "It would mean the world to my mother," he'd say. "It would really help Chloe's confidence." And Ilara, wanting to be the supportive wife, the loving daughter-in-law, would agree. She thought she was laying the foundations of a family. In reality, she was just renovating her own golden cage, reinforcing the bars with her own money. Her generosity was not seen as kindness, but as an admission of her otherness. It was the price she had to pay for entry, and they were more than happy to keep raising it, confirming to themselves that she was nothing more than a walking, talking ATM with a wedding ring. For years, she endured the subtle digs, the backhanded compliments, and the ever-growing list of financial emergencies. She kept silent, believing it was the price of harmony. But that silence was a pressure valve, and in that cold, white hospital room, it had finally, irrevocably blown. The fragile peace Ilara had purchased with her fortune, and her patience was shattered by a phone call on a crisp autumn afternoon. She was in the middle of a tense negotiation for a multi-million-dollar acquisition, her focus absolute, when her personal phone buzzed with a frantic urgency. It was Liam. His voice, usually so smooth and confident, was ragged with panic. "It's Dad," he stammered, his words tumbling over each other. "He collapsed at the club. An ambulance is taking him to street." "Judes, you have to come. Now." Ilara didn't hesitate. She stood up, uttered a single, concise apology to the bewildered executives across the table, and walked out of the most important meeting of her quarter. Her husband needed her. Family came first. That, at least, was a principle she still desperately wanted to believe in. When she arrived at the hospital, she found the Harrisons had already established a court of nervous energy in the private waiting room. Matilda was pacing, her hand pressed dramatically to her chest, while Chloe was weeping softly into a silk handkerchief, her mascara perfectly intact. Liam rushed to Ilara, grabbing her hands. His were cold and clammy. "They won't tell us anything," he said, his voice cracking. For a moment, Ilara's heart ached for him, for them all. This was a real crisis, a moment of shared vulnerability that she hoped might finally bridge the gap between her and his family. The doctor soon appeared, a calm, professional man who seemed immune to Matilda's theatrics. The news was serious, but not dire. George had suffered a significant cardiac event. His condition was stable, but he would require a triple bypass surgery. "It's a major operation," the doctor explained patiently, "but it's one we perform here with a very high success rate. We can have him scheduled within the week." A wave of genuine relief washed over Ilara. It was fixable. There was a plan. But her relief was short-lived. Matilda stepped forward, her expression transforming from feigned panic to icy indignation. "A high success rate? Here?" She spoke the words as if the hospital were a roadside clinic. "Doctor, my husband is George Harrison. He is not some nameless, ordinary man. We will not be settling for a standard procedure at a local hospital." Ilara watched in stunned silence as Matilda took control of the narrative, her grief instantly weaponized into a tool of status and demand. "I've been on the phone," Matilda announced to the room, though her sharp gaze was fixed on Ilara. "Dr. Alistair Finch in Boston. He is the only surgeon who will touch my husband. He pioneered the minimally invasive technique. He operates on senators, on royalty." Chloe, having miraculously recovered from her tears, chimed in immediately, her phone already in her hand. "And the recovery mother. He'll need the best. The Sterling Wing has private recovery suites with a dedicated nursing staff. I saw an article about it. It's where that movie star went after his accident." They spoke with a breathless, excited fervor, as if they were planning a lavish vacation rather than a life-saving surgery. They were no longer discussing George's health. They were curating a luxury medical experience, and every line they spoke was an invoice being mentally addressed to Ilara. The cost was never mentioned, because in their minds, it was an irrelevant detail. The unspoken assumption hung heavy in the air. Ilara would pay. Of course, she would pay. That night, back at their cold, silent home, Liam became the official emissary of their demands. He approached her in the library, his shoulders slumped, his face etched with a carefully cultivated exhaustion. He looked like a man crushed by the weight of the world, and Ilara's heart, foolish as it was, still went out to him. "Lara," he began, using the pet name from their early days, a name he now only used during negotiations. "We need to talk about Dad." He sat beside her, taking her hand. "My mother is right. We can't take any chances. We have to get Dr. Finch. We have to give him the best." Ilara, ever the pragmatist, tried to reason with him. "Liam, the doctor here is more than qualified. He has access to all of George's records. Flying a surgeon in from Boston is astronomically expensive and medically unnecessary. Your father's insurance won't cover a fraction of it." Liam pulled his hand away as if she had burned him. His face hardened. "Insurance? Is that what you're thinking about right now? My father is lying in a hospital bed, and you're thinking about money?" The accusation struck her like a physical blow. He was twisting her fiscal responsibility into a moral failing, her logic into a lack of love. "This isn't about the cost, Ilara. It's about doing what's right. It's for my dad. What is our money for? If not for this? Aren't we a family?" There it was, the word that was both a promise and a prison. He repeated it, a mantra of manipulation, until her defenses began to crumble. She saw the desperation in his eyes. a desperation she mistook for the fear of a loving son rather than the anxiety of a man terrified of disappointing his mother. So she relented. Against her better judgment, against the loud, screaming alarm bells in her own head, she agreed. The fight went out of her, replaced by a weary resignation. She would do this for Liam. She would do this to prove, once and for all, that she was a part of this family. She spent the next 2 days on the phone, a whirlwind of logistical and financial activity. She arranged for the wire transfers, enormous sums that left her business accounts depleted. She coordinated with Dr. Finch's office, chartered a private jet, and booked the most expensive suite in the hospital's Sterling wing. She handled every detail with her signature efficiency, a CEO executing a hostile takeover of her own finances. As she made the final confirmation call, Liam, Matilda, and Chloe stood nearby. The moment she hung up, the oppressive cloud of anxiety lifted from them. But it wasn't replaced by the warmth of gratitude. Instead, a chilling air of satisfaction settled in its place. Matilda gave a crisp, triumphant nod. Chloe shot Liam a victorious glance. The first crack had appeared, not in George Harrison's heart, but in the very foundation of Alara's life, and she had just paid an exorbitant price to widen it herself. The surgery, for all its heralded complexity and astronomical cost, was remarkably swift and uncomplicated. Dr. Alistair Finch, the famed surgeon from Boston, flew in, performed his medical artistry with a detached precision, collected a fee that could have purchased a small island, and was gone before the anesthesia had fully worn off George Harrison. The patriarch was recovering, his prognosis excellent. In a normal family, this would have been a moment of profound relief, a time for quiet gratitude and joyful reunion. But for the Harrisons, it was simply the beginning of a new, even more expensive chapter. The private suite in the Sterling wing became Matilda's new social salon. The scent of antiseptic was constantly overpowered by the fragrance of fresh flower arrangements that arrived daily, each one more extravagant than the last. Friends of the family would cycle through, offering condolences that sounded more like compliments on the quality of the accommodations. Matilda would hold court, speaking in hushed, dramatic tones about the terrible ordeal, all while sipping on expensive tea delivered by the hospital's room service, the bills for which were sent directly to Alara's office. Chloe was a permanent fixture, scrolling through her phone, occasionally sighing with a performative weariness before complaining about the quality of the hospital's Wi-Fi. George himself, the supposed center of this crisis, was treated less like a patient and more like a prop, a silent, gray-faced justification for their continued presence and indulgence. It was during this period that Liam began to drift away from Alara, becoming a ghost in their own home. His excuse was always the same: "I need to be at the hospital with Dad." He would leave early in the morning and return late at night, smelling faintly of a cologne he didn't own. At first, Alara accepted it. She told herself he was processing the trauma, that he needed to be with his family. But the pragmatist in her, the CEO who built an empire by recognizing patterns, couldn't ignore the inconsistencies. There were the late-night text messages that would make him smile, a soft, private smile that was never directed at her. He would angle the phone away if she walked into the room, the faint blue glow of the screen illuminating a secret life she was not privy to. The first concrete lie felt like a small tremor before an earthquake. It was nearly 10 o'clock one evening when Liam texted her, "Still at the hospital. Dad's having a rough night. Don't wait up." An hour later, plagued by a sudden, nagging worry for George, Alara called the nurses' station in the Sterling wing for an update. A cheerful, efficient nurse answered. "Oh, Mr. Harrison is doing wonderfully," she reported. "He's been sleeping peacefully for hours. A perfect patient." Alara paused, her heart beating a little faster. "And my husband, Liam?" she asked, her voice steady. "Is he still there?" There was a brief rustle of papers. "Mr. Harrison?" "No, dear. He signed out just after dinner, around 7. The line went quiet. 3 hours. For 3 hours, Liam had been somewhere else, somewhere he had to lie about. The nurse's cheerful words echoed in her mind, a stark contrast to the cold dread that was now seeping into her bones. Her home, once her sanctuary, now felt like an empty stage, and she was living with a leading man who was performing in a different play entirely. The ghost that haunted her marriage was given a name on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Alara had come home early, hoping to have a quiet evening, perhaps even a real conversation with her husband. As she walked down the marble hallway, she heard Chloe's voice, light and conspiratorial, drifting from the sunroom. She was on the phone. Alara slowed her steps, not wanting to interrupt. "I know, it's just awful what she has to wear. But Liam says her spirits are good," Chloe was saying, followed by a tinkling laugh. "He's completely devoted, practically lives at her side. Amelia is just glowing. You can hardly even tell she's—" "Oh, hold on." Alara had stepped into the doorway. Chloe's face went pale, her eyes wide with panic. I have to go," she stammered into the phone, hanging up abruptly. She turned to Alara, forcing a bright, brittle smile. "Alara, you're home early." Ilara's gaze was unwavering. "Who is Amelia?" The question was quiet, but it landed with the force of a gavel. Chloe's composure faltered. "Oh, Amelia. Just an old friend from college. She's pregnant, on bed rest. Liam's been a saint, visiting her, keeping her company since her husband travels so much. He's just so kind-hearted." The lie was too quick, too detailed, too desperate. And it didn't explain the glowing, or the devotion, or the sudden, sharp intake of breath Chloe had taken when she'd seen her. The name hung in the air between them. Amelia. A whisper that now had the weight of a scream. The final unraveling was, fittingly, about money. A week after George was discharged, Matilda summoned Alara and Liam for a family meeting. She announced, with the air of a queen issuing a decree, that George's recovery required a very specific climate. "Dr. Finch's people," she said, waving a dismissive hand, "they strongly recommend a 3-month stay at a specialized wellness clinic. There is a magnificent one in the Swiss Alps. The pure mountain air is exactly what his heart needs to fully heal." The audacity of it was breathtaking. It was no longer a request. It was a demand for a 3-month, all-expenses-paid European vacation disguised as medical necessity. Liam, to his credit, had the decency to look uncomfortable. He presented the idea to Alara later, not with conviction, but with the weary air of a man delivering a message he knew to be absurd. He couldn't even meet her eyes. "My mother thinks it's for the best," was all he could manage. In that moment, looking at her husband's averted gaze, something in Alara finally clicked into place. The emotional, loving wife receded, and the sharp, analytical CEO took her place. This wasn't a series of unfortunate events. This was a coordinated campaign. The inflated medical bills, the constant lies from Liam, the whispers of a woman named Amelia, the impossible demand for a Swiss retreat, they were all data points indicating a catastrophic system failure. Her marriage. She realized she wasn't just losing money, she was being systematically dismantled, her assets and her heart plundered by the very people she had tried so desperately to call family. That night, she didn't go to their shared bedroom. She went to her home office, the one sanctuary where she was still in complete control. The city lights glittered below like a blanket of scattered diamonds. For the first time in a long time, she felt utterly, completely alone. But with the loneliness came a chilling clarity. She sat down at her desk, the polished wood cool beneath her hands. She opened her laptop, and with steady, deliberate fingers, she typed a query into the search bar. Not for stock prices, not for market analysis. She typed, "Top private investigators in New York." The silence in the room was absolute. The storm was no longer gathering. It was here. Hiring a private investigator felt less like a betrayal of her marriage and more like an act of self-preservation. Alara found a man named Davies, whose firm was tucked away in a nondescript building in Midtown, an office of quiet efficiency that promised discretion above all else. Mr. Davies himself was a man who seemed to be composed entirely of sharp angles and quiet observation. He did not offer condolences or platitudes, he simply listened, his gaze steady and professional, as Alara laid out the parameters of the job. Her voice never wavered. She spoke with the same dispassionate clarity she used when outlining a corporate strategy. "I want full surveillance on my husband, Liam Harrison," she stated, her hands folded neatly on the polished table between them. "I want to know where he goes, who he meets, and for how long. I am particularly interested in his activities when he claims to be at the hospital visiting his father." She slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is the name of a woman I believe he is seeing. Amelia. I have no last name." Her second directive was even more precise. "I have made a series of significant financial transfers to my husband's family for my father-in-law's medical care. I want a full, forensic audit of where that money has gone. I need to see the actual, itemized invoices from the hospital and a complete trace on every dollar I transferred." She provided him with account numbers and dates. It was an audit of her own life, a formal investigation into the bankruptcy of her heart. "Mr. Davies simply nodded, took the papers and said, "I will be in touch within 2 weeks." Those 2 weeks were the longest of Alara's life. She moved through her days like an automaton, a ghost haunting the edges of her own existence. She attended board meetings, her mind 1,000 miles away. She sat through silent, tense dinners with Liam, the unspoken questions hanging between them like a shroud. He would tell her about his day, the lies now so obvious they were practically transparent. He'd speak of a difficult conversation with one of George's doctors, while Alara knew, from a quick, anonymous call she'd made herself, that George hadn't seen a doctor all day. She would simply nod, her expression placid, all the while feeling like a spy in her own home. She was playing the part of the devoted wife, and her performance was flawless because she knew the final act was fast approaching. The call came on a Tuesday. "The report is ready," was all Mr. Davies said. They met in the quiet, impersonal lobby of a hotel, a neutral ground for the detonation that was about to occur. He handed her a thick, deceptively plain manila envelope. She took it, her fingers steady, paid his final invoice without looking at the amount, and left. She did not open it in the car. She did not take it home. She drove to the one place on earth that was truly hers, the top floor of the OptiStream Tower. It was late, the offices were empty, and the city spread out below her window like a silent, glittering accomplice. With a deep breath, she broke the seal. The first items she pulled out were the photographs. The 8x10 glossies felt heavy, weighted with the truth she had both sought and dreaded. And there they were. Liam and a woman with radiant, old money beauty, Amelia van der Sloot, the report noted. It wasn't a cheap, sordid affair in a series of anonymous hotel rooms. It was a life, a real one. There was a photo of them laughing over coffee at an outdoor cafe, Amelia's head thrown back in genuine joy. There was one of them holding hands while walking a golden retriever in the park, looking for all the world like a perfect, happy couple. The most brutal photograph was of them standing outside a magnificent brownstone on the Upper East Side, Liam's arm around her waist, pointing up at a window as if discussing their future. He was smiling the same smile he had used on Alara in the early days of their love, the one that had convinced her he was her forever. He had not just cheated on her, he had replaced her, rebuilding the very dream he had sold to her with someone else. The next section was a series of transcripts from audio surveillance. Mr. Davies had caught Matilda and Chloe having lunch at a restaurant. Ilara's eyes scanned the cold, typewritten words, her blood turning to ice. "Honestly, the Swiss clinic was a stroke of genius, Mother," Chloe's voice was quoted as saying. "Ilara bought it completely. She's so focused on her work, she's completely clueless." Matilda's reply was even more venomous. "It's a necessary final step. Once Liam secures that last transfer, he'll have more than enough to set himself and Amelia up properly. It's time we had the Harrison family back on its feet, with a proper Harrison wife. Amelia understands legacy. All Alara understands is a balance sheet." It was all there, malicious, calculated, and cruel. They weren't just tolerating the affair, they were sponsoring it. They were the architects of her replacement, and she was the unwitting financier of her own demise. The final pages were the financial reports. It was a spreadsheet, cold and clinical. One column detailed the transfers from Alara's accounts, totaling just over $1.5 million since George's collapse. The column next to it showed the verified expenditures. The official, itemized hospital bills, including Dr. Finch's exorbitant fee and the Sterling Wing Suite, came to $482,000, a staggering $1 million discrepancy. The rest of the page was a horrifying map of her stolen money. There was a $75,000 charge at a Land Rover dealership. There were credit card statements for Chloe, filled with purchases from Chanel and Gucci. There was a wire transfer of $200,000 to an interior design firm with the memo Amelia versus Project. And there it was, the final, damning piece of evidence, a $150,000 payment to a real estate agency, a down payment on the lease for the very same Upper East Side brownstone from the photograph. Alara leaned back in her leather chair, the papers spread before her like the wreckage of a plane crash. She didn't cry. The pain was too vast, too profound for tears. It was a physical sensation, a crushing weight that settled deep in her chest, making it difficult to breathe. This was the death of love, the death of hope, the death of the foolish, trusting woman she had once been. She sat there for what felt like hours, the silence of the office broken only by the faint hum of the servers in the other room. She picked up the photo of Liam and Amelia laughing. She studied it, not with the heartbroken eyes of a betrayed wife, but with the cold, detached curiosity of a scientist examining a specimen under a microscope. She saw every detail, every lie. And then she looked up, her gaze falling upon her own reflection in the dark, floor-to-ceiling window. The woman staring back at her was a stranger. The softness was gone, the hopeful light in her eyes extinguished. In its place was a chilling, absolute calm. The grief was a corpse. The love was a memory. All that remained was the simple, elegant math of retribution. The drive home from her office was a journey through a new world. The sun was just beginning to bleed over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gray, but Alara saw none of it. The vibrant, living city she had always loved now looked like a ghost of itself, a collection of empty structures. The woman who had left her home the previous day no longer existed. In her place was someone else, a person forged in the cold, silent crucible of betrayal. She felt a terrifying clarity, a complete absence of the chaotic, messy emotions that had clouded her judgment for years. The love was gone. The hurt had been cauterized. All that remained was a singular, chilling purpose. She walked into the house just as Liam was coming down the stairs, looking rumpled and vaguely guilty. He stopped short when he saw her. "Ilara? My God, where have you been?" I was worried. The concern in his voice was a masterful performance, but she could now see the subtle tells she had missed before. The slight flicker in his eyes, the way his hand instinctively went to the pocket holding his phone. She, in turn, gave the performance of her life. She allowed a deep, convincing weariness to settle onto her features. "The office," she sighed, rubbing her temples. "We had a catastrophic server failure in the London data center. I've been on calls all night. It's been a nightmare." It was a plausible, impeccable lie. It played directly into their narrative of her as the work-obsessed woman who was always distracted by her business. She walked past him, pausing at the foot of the stairs. "About the clinic in Switzerland," she said, her voice soft and resigned. "I've been thinking. You're right. Your mother is right. We shouldn't take any chances with your father's health. Money is just money. I'll have my assistant start the transfer tomorrow." Liam's relief was so profound, so immediate, that it was almost comical. He saw not a wife capitulating, but a bank vault swinging open. "Thank you, Lara," he said, his voice thick with false emotion. "It means the world to us. You're doing the right thing." She simply nodded, a faint, sad smile on her lips. "For family," she said quietly, and walked up the stairs. The first piece of bait had been laid, and the target had taken it without a second's hesitation. The next morning, Alara did not call her corporate lawyers. They were brilliant at contracts and acquisitions, but this was not a business deal. This was a demolition. She needed an architect of a different sort. Her research had led her to one name, Vera Sterling, Miss. Sterling was a legend in the quiet, vicious world of high-net-worth divorces and hostile asset litigation. Her office was a study in minimalist power. Steel, glass, and a single, dramatic orchid on a stark white desk. Vera herself was in her late 50s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything and forgive nothing. Alara did not cry or recount the painful story of her marriage. She walked in, sat down, and placed the PI's manila envelope on the desk between them. "This is a file containing evidence of marital infidelity, conspiracy, and systematic fraud," Alara began, her tone as level as if she were discussing a quarterly report. "I am the primary asset in this portfolio. My partners are attempting a hostile liquidation. I want to freeze their assets, reverse the flow of capital, and legally dismantle the entire enterprise." Vera Sterling raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She had seen scorned spouses before, but she had never seen one speak with the cold, precise language of a corporate raider. She spent 20 minutes reading through the file, her expression unchanging. Finally, she closed the envelope and looked at Alara. "This is not a divorce, Miss Harrison," she said, a hint of admiration in her voice. "This is a declaration of war. I assume you want to win it decisively." Alara's reply was simple. "I don't just want to win, Miss Sterling. I want to rewrite the terms of their surrender." Thus began the work of the quiet architect. Under Vera's expert guidance, Alara began to systematically erase herself. She became a ghost in her own financial empire. They worked with a silent, ruthless efficiency, creating a labyrinth of legal and financial structures. Her majority shares in OptiStream were transferred into an ironclad, anonymous trust. Her vast real estate holdings were folded into a series of newly formed LLCs with innocuous names, each one layered under another, making the true owner nearly untraceable. Her personal fortune, the liquid assets the Harrisons so desperately craved, was moved into offshore accounts, protected by jurisdictions that would laugh at a New York divorce court subpoena. She was building a fortress, brick by invisible brick. But her plan was far more elegant than simply hiding her money. A fortress was defensive. She was planning an attack. "Their weakness," Alara explained to Vera one evening, "is not just their greed, it's their arrogance. They believe I am new money, and therefore unintelligent. They believe I am so blinded by my love for Liam that I am a fool. We will use that. We will not starve them. We will offer them a feast." The idea was born, a fake investment, a golden opportunity so dazzling, so perfectly tailored to their fantasies of restoring the Harrison name that they would be constitutionally incapable of resisting. It would be their salvation, the final, grand score that would set them up for life. Vera's job was to draft the contracts, documents that would look like an invitation to a golden future, but would, in reality, be a legally binding confession and a forfeiture of everything they had left. Throughout this period, Alara's performance at home was worthy of an Oscar. She became the wife they always wanted her to be, subdued, compliant, and seemingly focused on domestic life. She discussed interior design with Matilda, feigning interest. "You have such impeccable taste," she'd say. "I've been thinking, perhaps I should invest my money more wisely in things that last." In legacy, she would ask Liam for his advice on fabricated business dilemmas, stroking his ego, making him feel intelligent and in control. He, in his blissful ignorance, saw her new demeanor as a sign of her final submission, a woman broken by the stress of his father's illness, finally ready to become a proper Harrison wife. He had no idea he was a fly, happily walking into the most elegant and intricate web he had ever seen. One evening, Vera slid the final document across her desk. "It's done," she said. "The Harrison Family Restoration Fund. The prospectus is a work of fiction. The signature page, however, is a masterpiece of legal destruction." Alara looked at the document, her name not appearing anywhere on it, and felt nothing. No fear, no excitement, no regret. She was no longer the woman who built a company from the ground up. She was now the woman who was about to dismantle a family using the very materials they had so generously provided. Their greed, their arrogance, and their profound, fatal underestimation of her. Alara was done with subtle hints. The time for planting seeds of suggestion was over. Now it was time to lay the perfect, glistening bait. She moved the piece closer to the trap. She brought home a sheaf of thick, glossy prospectus documents, bound in expensive faux leather. They were for a fictional entity called Evergreen Coast Development, a supposed mega project involving luxury condos and commercial hubs on the booming Florida coast. The entire document was a masterwork of professional deception, drafted by her legal and financial team. It included just enough complicated financial jargon, asterisk, leveraged returns, de-risked capital flow, future-proofing, asterisk, to intimidate and impress the financially illiterate Harrisons. She didn't hand them the documents. She left them casually, almost carelessly, on the antique mahogany desk in the shared study, ensuring the title page, with its spectacular artists' renderings, was visible. She knew Matilda, the queen of snooping, would find them within the hour. The reaction was immediate and perfectly predictable. Matilda, Chloe, and Liam swooped down on the documents like vultures on carrion. They spent days huddled over the pages, their faces flushed with a feverish, barely contained excitement. Their old money arrogance was no match for Alara's strategic, new money savvy. They didn't see a complex real estate venture. They saw a quick, spectacular win, a chance to not just survive, but to vault back into the elite without the humiliating need for Alara's day-to-day corporate money. "Liam, look at this," Matilda hissed one evening, jabbing a manicured finger at a chart, projecting a 400% return. "This is it. This is how we restore the name. Forget that crude tech business. This is real wealth." Chloe, ever the sycophant, chimed in. "And imagine the society buzz. We'll be pioneers, Mom, not just survivors." Liam, the weakest link, became Alara's primary aggressor. Driven by the desperate need to secure a wealthy future with Amelia, the woman he'd promised a luxury life, he relentlessly badgered Alara. He saw the Evergreen Coast Development as his escape route, his ticket to freedom from the woman he was currently cheating on and funding his entire life with. He came to Alara in the master bedroom, not pleading this time, but pushing. "We need to talk about this Florida project, Alara," he began, trying to inject authority into his voice. "It's unprecedented. My contacts in the city are buzzing. We need to be all in. I've been analyzing the prospectus, and frankly, leaving our capital where it is, spread across all those tedious accounts, is an insult to this opportunity." Alara looked up from the book she was reading, her expression a careful blend of confusion and reluctant openness. "Consolidate? Liam, that's hundreds of millions. Nexus Tech has assets tied up everywhere. It's complex." He moved closer, his hand coming to rest on her shoulder in a gesture that was supposed to be comforting, but felt utterly proprietary. "It is complex, yes, but I can manage it. We need to simplify, we need to focus. You trust me, don't you? I'm your husband. I have the business pedigree, the lineage for this kind of high-stakes play." He was selling her his own version of his family's self-delusion. The idea that a Harrison, simply by virtue of his name, was a superior financier to the woman who built a billion-dollar company from a laptop. "Focusing the investment," he continued, emphasizing the buzzwords. "We liquidate the remaining, jointly held traditional assets, the few Harrison properties that are still viable, the last of the family's modest investment portfolio. We transfer the capital to a single, secure investment vehicle. I'll manage the transfer, you just sign off on the release of funds. Think of it, Alara, a return that will dwarf Nexus Tech. We can both relax. We can start thinking about us again. Us." The word was a grotesque insult, yet Alara kept her face soft, her eyes wide and trusting. She feigned worry, making him promise, again and again, that the move was absolutely safe. "It's totally safe, Alara," he assured her, his hand squeezing her shoulder with a confidence he hadn't possessed in years. He believed it too. His mind was already calculating his future with Amelia, the money multiplying in his head. "Trust me." That was all Alara needed. She signed everything. She signed the documents that liquidated the family's remaining valuable holdings, the inherited antiques, the few blue-chip stocks George had managed to hold on to, the subsidiary company she'd bought him years ago as a gesture of goodwill. All were transferred to an investment vehicle under Liam's temporary control. In reality, that investment vehicle was nothing more than a legal entity owned by one of Alara's newly formed debt-purchasing shell companies. Liam, in his greed, was unknowingly signing over every last tangible and intangible asset, every remaining piece of collateral, not to a new investment, but directly and legally into her hands. The trap had closed. The Harrisons, completely blinded by the dazzling prospects of the fictional Evergreen Coast development, were oblivious. They saw Alara's compliance as weakness, her signing of the papers as the final act of a woman too clueless to understand high finance. They believed they were guiding her to their salvation. They saw her as a puppet, pulling the strings of her enormous wealth for their benefit, confirming their own self-worth. Matilda was triumphant. She started making grand pronouncements at their social club, hinting that Alara is finally seeing the wisdom of letting Liam handle the big money. Chloe was even more brazen, subtly pushing Alara towards filing for separation, convinced Alara would walk away with a modest, fixed settlement, and the Harrisons would be left with the massive returns from the Evergreen Coast project. They were utterly convinced Alara was about to finance her own quiet exit and their spectacular re-entry into the true stratosphere of wealth. Their triumph was so close, so tangible, they couldn't smell the gunpowder of the trap they were walking into. Alara, meanwhile, worked quietly with her legal team. The investment vehicle, Liam now controlled, was used to buy up all the lingering long-term debts and outstanding mortgages on the Harrison estate, the very house they were standing in, the last symbol of their lineage. She didn't buy the house, she bought the debt. This meant that when the time came, the Harrisons wouldn't lose the house to a bank. They would lose it to a faceless corporation that she secretly owned. It was clean, it was legal, and it was devastatingly effective. Every move was checked, every signature verified, every potential loophole sealed. Alara understood that the best revenge is a dish served cold, and that the temperature of this justice needed to be absolute zero. She continued to play the part of the slightly naive, devoted wife, occasionally asking Liam, "Are you sure about this, dear? It seems like a lot of risk." And every time, Liam would dismiss her with a patronizing, yet assuring smile. "Don't worry your pretty little head about it, Alara. That's why you have me." He was so arrogant, so blinded by the money he believed was his, that he didn't realize he had just handed the keys to his entire family's past, present, and future over to the woman he planned to abandon. The stage was now fully set. The financial noose was complete, tightened perfectly around the neck of the Harrison legacy. Alara had secured the rights to every single string. All that remained was the final, public pulling. She simply waited for the right moment to initiate the gala, the grand event she would use to deliver the verdict. The moment the Harrisons would finally realize that the gilded cage wasn't for her, but for them, and the golden faucet they'd been so eager to turn on full blast had, in fact, been connected to a high-pressure line leading straight to their own collapse. Her revenge wasn't about fury, it was about ownership. And now, she owned them, completely. The trap was set, the financial net was tight. Now, Alara needed a stage, a grand amphitheater for the public execution of the Harrison legacy. She announced the party. A lavish, no-expense-spared gala hosted at the Harrison estate, the one she had been quietly funding, maintaining, and, as of last week, legally owning the debt of for years. The stated reason, the polite fiction she offered to the city's elite, was threefold. To celebrate George's full, miraculous recovery, to toast our enduring family unity, and to publicly announce our family's pioneering involvement in the magnificent Evergreen Coast development. The real reason was simple, to ensure the maximum number of witnesses for the downfall. Alara's justice wouldn't be served in a quiet, stale courtroom. It would be delivered under the glare of crystal chandeliers before the eyes of the very people whose good opinion the Harrisons cherished above all else. The preparations were meticulous. Alara personally oversaw every detail. She hired the most expensive caterers, the most sought-after floral designers, and the premier string quartet. This final display of opulence was essential. The Harrisons needed to be utterly convinced that they had won, that they were finally on the cusp of their glorious financial and social renaissance. The higher they soared in their delusion, the farther they would fall. The guest list was a masterpiece of strategic cruelty. It included all the Harrisons' most important contacts, the key figures in the city's old guard who looked down on them, their biggest creditors who were starting to get nervous, their longtime rivals who secretly wished for their demise, and, most crucially, the society columnists and bloggers who could ensure the story went viral before the night was even over. Every invitee was a potential juror, a witness, or a chronicler of their shame. The atmosphere in the house in the days leading up to the gala was thick with the Harrisons' rampant, self-satisfied excitement. Matilda and Chloe were radiant, bustling about, already accepting virtual congratulations. They purchased new, incredibly expensive gowns, naturally, paid for by the funds Alara had accidentally left accessible. They greeted the few early delivery personnel with an air of triumphant confidence, dropping heavy-handed hints about their coming fortune and their strategic genius. The Vance girl finally saw reason, Matilda told a bewildered florist, adjusting a diamond cuff. Liam knows how to move in these circles. Old money always prevails, dear. Liam, full of his own hubris, was mingling with the early arrivals, checking his phone repeatedly for texts from Amelia, the woman he planned to spend his vast, imminent fortune with. He was the picture of the successful, handsome heir, about to take his proper place at the helm of the family's renewed fortune. They were all utterly, blissfully convinced of their impending victory. They saw the gala as their coronation. Alara saw it as their funeral. Meanwhile, Alara's technical team, disguised as event production staff, was working discreetly. A massive, high-definition projection screen was installed on a sliding mechanism behind the main ballroom stage, hidden by elegant velvet drapery. Audio lines were run, connecting to the central speaker system. Her lawyer, a brilliant, terrifyingly discreet woman named Dana, was disguised as a distinguished foreign investor from a prominent Swiss banking house, strategically placed near the main entrance to ensure she was an early witness. Every technical detail was checked and double-checked. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a hostile corporate presentation. And Alara was about to deliver the quarterly earnings report on the Harrison family, a report that would read, net worth, 0. Liabilities, infinite. Public image, ruined. The clock ticked down to the start of the event. Alara chose her own attire carefully, not the lavish diamonds or the blinding gold preferred by Matilda. She wore a simple, striking emerald dress, a study in quiet power. Her jewelry was minimal. One vintage gold serpent cuff, a symbol of silent wisdom and deadly patience. Her demeanor was utterly serene, unnervingly calm. She spoke little, simply smiling and nodding, her eyes observing everything: the anticipation in the guests' faces, the smug assurance of the Harrisons, the precise placement of the hidden microphone. She moved like a ghost in her own house, watching the victims enjoy their final, luxurious meal. She was the eye of the storm. She felt no triumph yet, only the profound stillness of absolute focus. Her heart rate was steady. Her breath was even. She had detached herself from the pain and replaced it with purpose. At 9:15, Liam, already slightly flushed with expensive champagne and the excitement of his own grand self-delusion, caught her eye. He walked over, putting his arm around her in a gesture of forced unity for the benefit of their onlookers. "Well, darling," he murmured, his voice heavy with self-congratulation. "A magnificent evening. Everyone is talking about the project. This is what we do best. Old money and new opportunity. You did wonderfully, Alara. Now, let's go get this announcement over with so we can truly enjoy ourselves." He was hurrying her, eager to announce the fictional investment that he thought would secure his escape from her. Alara smiled a rare, thin smile. "Of course, Liam. Let's get the announcement over with." She slipped out of his embrace and walked towards the stage. She moved with a measured pace that demanded attention. The string quartet faded to silence. The chatter in the ballroom slowly died down as Alara, the unassuming wife and reluctant financier, stepped onto the small podium. She looked directly at her husband and his family, who were now beaming at her from the front row, ready to bask in the reflected glory of the announcement. Her smile was tight, final, and cold. She picked up the champagne flute, tapping it gently with a small silver spoon. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice clear, carrying, and utterly devoid of the warmth they expected. "Thank you for coming. Tonight, we celebrate many things. But most importantly, tonight, we celebrate the truth." Liam's smile froze. Matilda's eyes narrowed slightly. Chloe simply looked confused. The crowd, however, was immediately intrigued. They sensed the shift in the air, the sudden, sharp scent of impending drama. The architect was no longer hiding in the shadows. The pre-show was over. The curtain was about to rise. Elara didn't rush. Her voice, amplified across the ballroom, remained unnervingly steady, a calm narration of a horror story. She started not with a bang, but with a deliberate, agonizingly slow recollection. She started with a toast to George's recovery, a polite pause that allowed the Harrisons to relax one final, fatal time. Then, she transitioned seamlessly, her eyes locking onto Liam. "When I married into this family, I was taught the value of heritage, of tradition, and of sacrifice, and I was willing to sacrifice everything. I was taught that family is worth any price." She paused, letting the silence gather weight. "And I paid the price, repeatedly." She began to recount her journey as the Harrison family's financier. She spoke of the crippling debts she had cleared, without a second thought, the expenses she had covered for the estate, and most recently, the hundreds of thousands she'd poured into George's critical care, doing it all, she said, out of love and obligation to the man I married. Her tone was not angry, it was factual, almost wistful. She lifted her hand, taking a slow sip of champagne. "But you see, my dear friends, I am a business owner, and I deal in facts, not fiction. And business requires an audit. A complete, cold look at the books." The air in the ballroom went brittle. Matilda shifted uncomfortably. Liam's polite smile began to twitch. With a simple, almost casual hand gesture, the giant projection screen that had been hidden by the velvet drapery behind her sprang to life. It didn't display the glorious blueprints of the Evergreen Coast development. It displayed a meticulously detailed, color-coded ledger. The title page was stark: "The Harrison Family Financial Misappropriation. A 7-figure audit." The ballroom exploded in a collective, horrified gasp. Elara ignored the noise. She was no longer a wife. She was a CEO presenting damning evidence to a board of directors. She pointed to the figures, a sleek presentation pointer clicking sharply on the screen as she began to walk the city's elite through the meticulous, undeniable receipts. The first slide showed the enormous transfers Elara had made to the Harrisons' accounts, labeled clinically as medical divided by therapeutic support. The second slide showed the corresponding withdrawals by Matilda and Chloe, but the labels were different, provided by Elara's forensic accountant. Matilda's spa and wardrobe fund, Chloe's Bahamas getaway and new car lease, and Liam's Tribeca apartment deposit. The total number was staggering. It flashed crimson on the screen. Over $1 million diverted from Mr. Harrison's critical care funds. The Harrisons' faces were a portrait of collective horror. They were exposed, not just as dishonest, but as petty and shameless. Matilda was the first to regain voice, a sudden, desperate, and shrill sound. "This is a lie. It's fabricated. Elara, you are mad. Liam, tell them, this is fabricated." Her elegance had shattered, replaced by the panicked fury of a caught thief. Liam was a statue of paralyzed shock. His eyes darted frantically between his terrified mother, the damning evidence on the screen, and Elara, whose face remained a mask of detached, professional justice. He couldn't stammer a denial. Elara's voice cut through Matilda's rising hysteria, calm as a glacier. "The truth is never fabricated, Matilda. It is merely verified." She moved to the next slide. This one juxtaposed the absurdly inflated medical invoices the Harrisons had presented to her against the actual, legitimate hospital costs provided by the hospital's CFO, who was a quiet ally of Elara's legal team. The difference was astronomical. She demonstrated, with clinical precision, how they had manufactured fraudulent expenses, exaggerating George's condition and prolonging his stay to bleed her dry. "As you can see," Alara continued, her tone conversational. Only 20% of the total amount spent went towards Mr. Harrison's vital medical care. The rest was allocated to the lifestyle enhancements of those standing before you. They were not caring for their father and husband. They were funding their next vacation, their next trophy purchase, and their son's new life. The guests, the city's most respected and ruthless figures, were enthralled. Their whispers turned into a hostile, judgmental murmur. They were witnessing a spectacular fall from grace, a public shaming that would be discussed for decades. Ilara stepped away from the podium, letting the data hang in the air for a moment, letting the heavy, suffocating silence of confirmation settle over the room. I paid your bills because I was told it was love, but I'm afraid this audit shows it was nothing more than a carefully coordinated, 7-figure confidence scam. Henceforth, she had stripped them bare of their financial dignity, but she wasn't done. The final, more personal blow was about to land. The financial exposure was merely the hook. The personal betrayal was the stinger. She raised her finger again, pointing to the control panel, and the screen flashed once more. The financial audit hung on the screen, a monument to the Harrisons' brazen greed. But Alara wasn't finished. She knew that financial ruin could be recovered from. Public, moral annihilation could not. She paused, letting the silence of the stunned guests magnify the shame of her in-laws. Then, the ledger graphic vanished, replaced by a visual blow that was devastatingly intimate and ruinous. The screen was filled with photos, high resolution, undeniable images of Liam and Amelia, not just in discreet settings, but sharing private moments. Kisses stolen in dimly lit restaurants, intertwined hands on a beach chair in the Caribbean, and even photos of a luxurious apartment key labeled with Amelia's Tribeca address that Liam had clearly been using. The murmurs that had begun during the financial exposé died completely. The silence was now heavy with the pure, visceral shock of personal betrayal. Liam's carefully constructed image of the dutiful, stressed son collapsed entirely. He was caught not just cheating on his wife, but doing so while claiming to be at his father's bedside. Alara didn't give them a moment to breathe. She was delivering a relentless, 3-pronged attack. She pressed a button, and the ballroom speakers crackled, playing a high-quality audio recording. It was a conversation between Matilda and Chloe, recorded secretly in the kitchen of this very house, likely using the professional audio gear disguised as part of the event setup. Matilda's voice, smug and chilling, filled the room. The Vance girl is so simple. We just need to keep up the poor George routine until Liam can secure a proper divorce settlement. Then he can finally marry Amelia. She'll be thrilled we bankrolled their new life. It's a pity, all that money, but at least we'll get our Liam back and the name will be correct again. Chloe's answering laughter was a sound of pure, unadulterated malice, confirming the depths of their connivance. The recording ended. Matilda, whose face was blotchy with terror and shame, clawed at Liam's arm. It's edited. It's a cheap fabrication, Liam, tell them. Tell them, this is a desperate attempt by a vengeful woman. Her voice was shrill, desperate, devoid of the sophisticated control she had always wielded. Liam, however, was past denial. He stood there, utterly shattered, his face slick with sweat and tears of fear, not remorse. His own mother's voice had just betrayed his deepest shame to every person who mattered in his life. He couldn't speak. He was broken, exposed, and utterly ruined. Alara watched him, not with the fire of anger, but with an immense cold pity for the man she had loved and the profound disappointment he represented. You lied about your love, your loyalty, and your father's life, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, yet amplified to every corner of the room. You didn't just betray a wife. You executed a coordinated, financial and emotional fraud against an individual who only wanted to be part of your family. You treated my marriage like a business acquisition. She drew a deep breath. Congratulations, Liam. The acquisition is now complete, and I own you. She raised her hand. Instantly, the distinguished foreign investor, from the Swiss banking house her lawyer, Dana stepped forward, moving through the shell-shocked crowd with the speed and efficiency of a predator. She stopped directly in front of Liam, serving him with a thick sheaf of divorce papers and a legal summons right there on the stage. "This is the petition for dissolution of marriage, filed this morning, citing irreconcilable differences and comprehensive fraud," Dana stated in a cool, professional voice that echoed the finality of a judge's gavel. The crowd stirred violently. The divorce papers were a dramatic flourish, but Alara was far from finished. This was merely the second of her 3 fatal blows. The third was the one designed for total annihilation. Alara stepped back up to the microphone, her eyes sweeping over the defeated family and the silent, judging assembly. "Now, for the matter of the Evergreen Coast development, the glorious future you were all so eager to announce tonight." Her voice took on a sharper edge. "I must inform you that the project does not exist. It was a fabricated entity, a phantom. The glossy documents were merely props in my own investigation, designed to test the limits of your loyalty and, more accurately, your greed." She let the statement sink in, watching the dawning realization of true terror spread across the Harrisons' faces. "The documents you signed, Liam, consolidating the family's assets for this investment, were, in fact, the legal instruments used to transfer every remaining Harrison asset, including the collateral on this very estate, and all outstanding debts, to a private holding company, a company I control completely." She didn't shout. She delivered the news as one might read a stock ticker, impassively, definitively. "You didn't consolidate your capital for a new venture. You transferred the ownership and the liabilities of your entire existence to me. You have lost everything. You are financially solvent only to the extent that I choose to allow it. I not only paid your bills and exposed your affair, I just purchased your entire, worthless legacy." The sheer audacity, the cold, corporate precision of the revenge was stunning. The Harrisons had been hoisted entirely by their own petard. They had chased the phantom of a multi-million-dollar future, only to sign away their very foundation. Matilda crumpled. She didn't faint. She simply sank onto the stage steps, her face hidden in her hands, her sobs choked and pathetic. Chloe stood rigid, her carefully constructed elegance melting into a grotesque mask of fury and disbelief. Liam, the former golden boy, stood alone, the divorce papers trembling in his hands, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. The guests didn't need any further instruction. The message was clear. The Harrison family was not only disgraced, but financially extinct. People began to leave, not running in a panic, but walking away quickly, discreetly, keen to distance themselves from the catastrophic public downfall. Alara, having completed her presentation, nodded to her lawyer. Her job was done. She had delivered the final, crushing verdict. The architect had not only designed the downfall, but had personally overseen the demolition. The grand ballroom, only moments ago filled with the intoxicating promise of wealth and the stench of arrogance, was now a desolate, humiliating wreck. The catering staff, swift and silent, were already moving through the debris, clearing crystal glasses and abandoned canapes, acting as quiet, efficient undertakers for the Harrison family's social life. Alara walked off the stage, her high heels clicking softly on the marble floor. She didn't spare a glance for the broken figures she left behind. Liam was still standing, holding the divorce papers like a death warrant, his face a grotesque mask of shock and tears. Matilda had devolved into a pathetic, shuddering heap on the stage steps, her expensive gown pooled around her, a tragic caricature of the society queen. Chloe merely stood above her mother, vibrating with impotent, self-pitying rage, occasionally whispering a venomous, futile curse. The immediate fallout was brutal. The next morning, the story was not just front-page news. It was the lead segment on every financial news channel and the viral subject of every society blog. The Harrison name, once a symbol of old-world class and guarded prestige, was now synonymous with a brazen, colossal, and deeply petty scam. The ridicule was universal and merciless. Liam's carefully constructed life imploded within hours. Amelia, the woman for whom he had orchestrated his spectacular betrayal, was the first to cut ties. She was a socialite who only married up, and she had no interest in a pauper who was now a pariah. A single, icy text message was all he received. "Don't call me. You have nothing left." The man who believed he had secured his future with a more suitable, old money wife was left with nothing but his profound shame and the crushing knowledge that the only thing he had ever truly valued, money and status, had been stripped away by the one person he had dismissed. The legal machinery Alara had put in place moved with cold, corporate speed. The Harrison estate, the cherished symbol of their status and the literal foundation of their lives, was seized within 48 hours to cover the legitimate debts Alara now controlled. Matilda and Chloe were forced to confront the wreckage. They were left with nothing but a few boxes of inherited trinkets and the clothes on their backs. They were the new poor, but far worse. They were the new despised poor, hated not for their poverty, but for the moral depravity of their downfall. The old friends who once flocked to their galas now crossed the street to avoid the very sight of them. Alara, meanwhile, was the eye of the storm. She filed the final paperwork, separating her vast wealth from the wreckage of the Harrison name. She didn't issue a statement to the press. She didn't grant interviews. She didn't need to. The audited numbers, the photos, and the audio recording spoke a truth far more devastating than any personal interview could convey. She walked away from the house a final time, not looking back. She wasn't carrying a suitcase. She was carrying the profound silence of true victory. There was no exhilaration, no sense of giddy vengeance, just a deep, bone-weary sense of absolute completion. Her private justice was not fueled by vengeance, but by a cold, surgical necessity for closure, for truth, and for absolute control over her own narrative. She had closed the ledger, balancing the enormous debt of betrayal with a clean, total financial wipeout. She sat down with her lawyer, Dana, one last time to review the dissolution papers. Dana, a woman who had seen everything, looked at Alara with undisguised respect. "You didn't just win, Alara," Dana noted, signing the final document. "You ended them. You've set a new standard for divorce." Alara looked up, her expression calm. "They thought my silence was weakness, Dana. They thought my love was a commodity. They were wrong. Love is patient, yes, but justice is patient and utterly methodical." She understood that her revenge had been so total because it was purely logical. She had removed the toxic element, cleaned the books, and secured her future. She had achieved a level of control over her fate that no simple court ruling could have provided. Alara relocated her company's main office and her own residence to the West Coast, cutting all ties to the suffocating world of the East Coast elite and the memory of the Harrisons. She was free, she was richer, but most importantly, she was unburdened by the need for acceptance, unburdened by the mistake of loving someone incapable of true loyalty. Her marriage was a tragedy, a costly mistake she had rectified. But her divorce, her final act as the silent architect, was a chilling, masterful work of personal justice. The hurricane had passed, leaving behind a profound, cleansing stillness. Alara Vance was not the victim of a betrayal. She was the survivor who had rebuilt her empire upon the ashes of her enemy's arrogance. She was ready to start a new life, stronger and infinitely wiser. The months that followed the infamous Harrison Gala were a period of profound, healing silence for Alara. She was physically removed from the wreckage, having settled into a sleek, minimalist penthouse overlooking the Pacific. The air was cleaner, the light softer, and the ghosts of betrayal seemed unable to cross the continent. Nexus Tech thrived, buoyed not only by Alara's renewed focus, but by the public's strange, morbid fascination with the woman who had executed the ultimate corporate takedown of her own marriage. She was richer, yes, but her greatest wealth was the unburdening, the freedom from the need to earn the respect of the undeserving. One crisp autumn morning, a thick, expensive paper envelope arrived at her new office. It wasn't from a law firm. It bore a faded postmark and was addressed in shaky, precise handwriting that she recognized instantly, a script of a man from a generation past. The sender was George Harrison, her former father-in-law. Alara paused, her heart beating a slow, steady rhythm. She was prepared for a desperate plea, a venomous curse, or perhaps a pathetic attempt at apology. She almost tossed it into the recycling bin, but a strange curiosity compelled her to open it. The letter inside was long, dense, and written entirely by hand. It was not a plea for money or forgiveness. It was a confession. George wrote of his profound, deep-seated shame. He admitted that he had seen the moral decay of his wife and children for years, but had been too weak, too much of a coward, to intervene. He had allowed his family's entitlement to fester, viewing himself as a silent victim when, in truth, he was a silent accomplice. He praised Ilara's intellect and regretted that Liam had never truly seen it. But then came the revelation, the piece of information that landed with the force of a tectonic shift. "You have a mind, Ilara, a drive my son never understood," the letter read. "You once asked me, years ago, where the idea for Nexus Tech came from. You saw me sketching in the study one night, and you asked me what I was working on." He went on to explain that the core concept of her multi-million-dollar tech company, the very idea she had painstakingly built her empire upon, was not entirely her original thought. It had been his. An idea, a detailed business plan, he had sketched out in a leather-bound notebook decades ago, a dream he had abandoned out of a paralyzing fear of failure and the inevitable mockery of his own wife and children. The irony was crushing, breathtakingly complete. The very people who had scorned Ilara's new money and ridiculed her success as crude tech had, in their greed, financed their own destruction using the realization of George's long-discarded, brilliant vision. The capital they stole from her, the lifestyle they bankrolled, the affair they financed, it was all, in a bizarre, twisted way, fueled by George Harrison's forgotten genius, brought to life by the woman they hated. Ilara didn't cry. She sat back in her chair, a single, bitter laugh escaping her lips. Her incredible success, the financial weapon she had used to dismantle the Harrison family, was the accidental realization of the one man in that toxic house who had some vision but zero courage. She didn't forgive him. Forgiveness was too generous for an accomplice, even a silent one. But she understood him. He was the only victim of the Harrison greed who had also been their unwilling accomplice, a man crushed by the very people he should have led. She made one final, private decision. It was not about charity. It was about defining her own version of justice, a justice that was clean and complete. She instructed Dana to set up a small, anonymous trust fund. She used a minor fraction of the money recovered from the Harrison accounts, money that, ironically, had its roots in George's initial blueprint. The trust was designed to fund a modest, specialized passion project George had mentioned in his letter. A quiet, niche startup focused on sustainable aquaculture, a hobby he'd long enjoyed. Ilara ensured the funding was delivered to a discreet third party, with George Harrison listed only as the silent, sole administrator. This wasn't an act of grace or reconciliation. It was a final, profound act of control, giving George the one thing his family had stripped him of, the resources and the opportunity to execute his own long-abandoned dream, entirely separate from their poisonous influence. It was her way of ensuring the quiet man got his small, separate justice, while the perpetrators got the totality of hers. She had settled every account. Justice doesn't always wear a judge's robe, and it rarely comes from a courtroom. Sometimes it is born from the deepest betrayal, nurtured by an icy patience, and delivered with a perfectly calculated, data-driven plan. The world dismissed Ilara's silence as simple compliance. They were catastrophically wrong. They found out, too late, that the woman they underestimated was a powerful, patient force. Never, ever underestimate the silence of a person who has endured too much. That silence is not fear. It is the sound of an architect quietly drawing the blueprint for the end of your world. I am US. Join me next time for another true life drama from the world of American wealth, greed, and silent retribution.